Welcome, Ranger fans. I'm Jim Cerny. This is Rink Rap, an abbreviated edition. This is not going to be the full podcast. No guests today, no extended podcast. Instead, this is going to be straight to the point. Trade grades after the Rangers deal Chris Kreider to the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for 20-year-old center prospect Kerry Terrence, and also a swap of mid-round draft picks in the upcoming NHL draft. So, first of all, I welcome you all. I know there are a vast amount of Ranger fans that are in mourning right now. Chris Kreider is no longer a New York Ranger. Guy drafted in the first round in 2009 and, third all-time in goals, leads them in all-time franchise history, most playoff games played and, most playoff goals all time, most playoff points all time in franchise history. This is a guy that's really connected with the fans. Certainly, this generation, right at the top of most popular New York Rangers, right near the top of most popular New York Rangers. So I feel your pain. We've discussed here and I've written in stories, and it was just in my Rangers Daily the other day. My personal relationship with Chris and how I feel about him as a person. First class all the way, always was, from the day I met him at the NHL draft in Montreal in 2009 up until his final day with the New York Rangers and his kind of exit interview with reporters yesterday. He went out first class. That didn't surprise me at all. I didn't think he'd go out guns blazing. Instead, he goes out just the classy individual that he is, taking the high road, even though there's no question he wanted to remain a New York Ranger for the final, 2 years of his contract, at least, whether his career advances past that, we'll see. But he wanted to play out his contract here in New York. He didn't want to go anywhere, but he signs off on this trade. He could have blocked it, could have pulled, the Jacob Trouba last summer, but Kreider saw the writing on the wall. He knew where this was headed with himself and the organization, so he signed off on it. And again, I cannot emphasize enough what a first-class individual Chris Kreider always has been throughout his Rangers tenure, and certainly was right up until his final day as a New York Ranger this week. So for those of you Ranger fans that are mourning right now and are going to really miss Kreids, and, some of you younger fans that have really, you don't really know a New York Rangers team without Chris Kreider, without number 20, on the roster. Again, I hear you. And I feel your pain. And I've been, following your commentary and social media and your comments back and forth with me. My notifications are all filled up with your comments. But there's a flip side too. And the other fans are welcome as well. Those that felt it was time for Chris Kreider to move on. There are people, some, probably fewer than the first group, but there's another group that is celebrating this. Thinks it's much needed. Chris Drury's doing the right thing. He's really reworking and retooling the roster, breaking up the core, that has been together for a long time. Yeah, really, since Mika Zibanejad arrived here, this core has been centered around Chris Kreider and Mika Zibanejad, and those days are now officially gone. Even if Mika Zibanejad is still a New York Ranger next season, which I anticipate he will be. Especially after we hear good reporting by Larry Brooks saying that the Rangers kept Mika Zibanejad and Adam Fox and the other veterans on the roster fully apprised of what their plans were and how they were going about executing their plan to trade Chris Kreider this offseason. So, I'm not sure that you really include Mika in that group if you're also trying to move him or you're asking him to, waive his no move clause. So I thought Mika would be staying here anyway, especially because it'd be so difficult to trade him. But, that piece of it, probably means he's going to be here. So in any case, that's going off on a tangent. Today, we're going to just break down the trade grades for both teams, for the Rangers and the Ducks. And, there are going to be people that agree, disagree, love this trade, hate this trade. Rangers didn't get enough. Chris Drury did exactly what he needed to do. There are going to be opposite ends of the aisle here. and I'll quickly run through, my opinions on it. Um, toss out some grades. And then next week, we're going to come back and deeper dive into really what is next for the New York Rangers, because this is not it. Like, there is not anybody I've talked to. And first of all, I didn't think this would be it, but there's not anybody that I've talked to already or read, or heard on podcasts like Elliot Friedman, for example, people in the know that believe that this is it for the Rangers. In fact, it's the opposite. Many believe that there are many, not just, some, many more moves, many big moves to come by Chris Drury and company this offseason. So we will get into that in a longer edition of Rink Rap next week, and hope to have a guest on. So, get another opinion in here other than mine, and make sure to hit me up at X at Jim Cerny. Send me your comments and things that you'd like for me to talk about on next week's podcast. And, I'll work in some of your opinions as well. Okay. Trade grades. Rangers deal Kreider. We gave you the specifics already. Here's why I think this is probably like a B+ trade for the Rangers. And it centers really on one thing. And it was at the heart of a story that I wrote a month ago, a month before Chris Kreider was traded, which was titled, "This is why the Rangers, why it's now a good time for the Rangers to move Chris Kreider." And at the top of my list is the same reason why this trade comes across to me as a B+ for the Rangers, is that they shed all $13 million that was owed over the next 2 seasons on his contract. The Anaheim Ducks were able and willing to take on the remaining, money on his deal. So that's $6.5 million that the New York Rangers have saved under the salary cap. Remember, they were sitting at only $8.4 million in available cap space before trading Chris Kreider. Now they're up to $15 million. Now, listen, money gets chewed up quickly here, right? If you're going to keep K'Andre Miller, you got to pay him because he's a restricted free agent, 2 years away from unrestricted free agency. So if they keep him, you got to pay K'Andre Miller. Will Cooley, restricted free agent, you got to pay him. And then to a lesser degree, you also have Matt Rempe and Adam Edstrom as well in the mix, guys that you want to pay. I don't think that they're going to re-sign Zach Jones, but if they do, that would, marginally cut into their available salary cap space as well. So if they were just sitting at $8.4 million, listen, they would have been in trouble. There wouldn't be a lot of retooling the roster with that small amount of cap space, along with having to sign these restricted free agents. And again, we can argue and debate whether they're going to trade Miller or not, because it is really starting to look more and more like the Rangers are searching every avenue out there to see who's interested in K'Andre Miller and if they'll be able to trade him this summer. The latest on that, and again, I'm going a little bit on a tangent here, but the latest on that is that it appears the Rangers it's the term more than the money. It's the length of the contract more than the money that scares them with K'Andre Miller. Like, investing 6-7 years in K'Andre Miller really worries them because they're not sold on him. At 25 years old, there's been some good and there's been a lot of bad, right? And to be honest, not a lot in the middle. There's been a lot of up and a lot of really down. And he's certainly coming off an uneven season as well. He's a very polarizing player, as we've discussed here. But okay, so K'Andre Miller, that's a whole separate thing. You could free up more money by not re-signing him, trading him. But of course, then you got to replace him, yada, yada. The key here to why this is a good trade grade for the Rangers is that they eliminated his salary cap hit for the next 2 seasons, in particular this season, because don't forget, the cap really rises again next year. And also, Artemi Panarin, assuming the Rangers do not re-sign him, comes off their salary cap next year. So there's, they're going to have an abundance, or it should have an abundance of available salary cap space next year. But for right now, they really needed that $6.5 million to come off their ledger, just like they needed the $8 million of Jacob Trouba per year, his average annual value, to come off the ledger as well. Why they needed Barclay Goodrow's 3 point whatever it was million to come off the ledger as well. That's why these guys are being moved. It's not because they didn't have value to the team, or they weren't good leaders, or they weren't popular, or not productive. You can always argue those things. It's just that the Rangers needed the salary cap space. These are older veteran players. In Trouba's case, in Goudreau's case, certainly likely not playing up to what they were being paid. So those are the obvious places where you cut. And that's what Chris Drury's done. And, you can argue, and we talked about this with Don LaGreca last week, you can argue about how Chris Drury did it, but he was able to really open up some cap space by moving Goudreau and Trouba. And now again, he did it with Chris Kreider. And again, that's what makes this a win for the New York Rangers. So they get Kerry Terrence from Anaheim. And I've spoken to a few people who are, in the scouting business, and have seen certainly a lot more of Kerry Terrence than I have, though I've done a lot of research. And I also listened to a really good interview with Shane Malloy on NHL Network Radio the other day, talking about Kerry Terrence. And when I say everybody that I've spoken to has said the same thing about Terrence, the same things. He is a high character player. He's got some good speed, seen as a two-way guy, but not a single person that I talked to or a single thing that I've read leads me to believe that he is going to be more than a bottom six center in the NHL, assuming his progression and he gets to that point. But what he does do is he provides some organizational depth. He's 20 years old. He's going to turn pro this season. So, he'll be down in Hartford. He played at Erie the last few seasons in the Ontario Hockey League. He was a captain there. He was a 30-goal scorer at one point a couple of years ago, his draft year in 2023, scored 30 goals. His production has dipped since. He did deal with a pretty major injury this past season, was out a couple months. But, he's had some big game experience too, played a bottom six role for the United States when they won the World Junior Championship. He was teammates with Gabe Perreault and Drew Fortescue, helping the U.S. win the gold medal at the World Juniors in 2025 in December and January. So he's got some big game experience. Again, he's a good leader. Everyone talks about his character, very driven guy, hardworking guy, but nobody sees his skill level translating to being more than a bottom six center at the National Hockey League level or at the professional level. Even in the American League with Hartford. So you're not getting a lot back immediately or even in the long run, though he could surprise us. We don't know for Chris Kreider. So I get the argument where people say, well, wait a minute, what are we doing here? We've traded the best guy in the deal by a mile. We're getting a prospect that everyone's saying is the bottom six guy. Okay, that's not exciting. We didn't get a great draft pick or whatever. No. Well, here's the thing. The reason why you didn't get the bigger return, other than the fact that Kreider's coming off an injury-plagued down season last year, only the 30 points, and he had the back injury, the hand injury, and he's 34 years old, is the fact that Anaheim took on the entirety of the remainder of his contract. So, that was the most important thing to Chris Drury. Getting the, former second round pick, great. Organizational depth at center with Terrence, great. And, maybe he'll pan out. Maybe he'll be more than what everybody believes he'll be. But if this is what he's going to be, it's okay because Anaheim took on that salary. That is the bottom line, and that is the win here. Now, Kreider's absence, Rangers could go outside the organization, to get another forward here as they accrue more cap space. As we said, we think they're going to make more moves and they're going to have more cap space, whether it's for free agency or trades. But it opens up a spot on the left side in the top nine, right? So, you look at the group. Obviously, you have Artemi Panarin, it's there on the left side. Alexis Lafreniere could go back to the left side, possibly. Maybe he stays on the right side, but he could go to the left side. It's an option. Brennan Othman's an option on the left side. Will Cooley's an option on the left side. Gabe Perreault's an option for either left or right wing. What's a common denominator there? Those are a lot of young players that the Rangers just made some room for. Now listen, somebody's got to step in and grab a hold of the role. And you don't know until you know, right? It's easy to grade things now. It's more pertinent to grade a trade further down the line. But in the here and now, I think you got to like giving the opportunity to your best young players, and your best young players at the forward position in this organization, in no particular order, are Alexis Lafreniere, Will Cooley, Brennan Othman, Gabe Perreault. You don't want to stand in their way. And I get it. In the short term, maybe Kreider scores more goals than they do this season. But you develop them, right? Get them the experience. Get them in the flow. It's time for that opportunity here with the Rangers. They're not right on the cusp of winning the Stanley Cup. Got to hold on to every last veteran. That's partly what made Chris Kreider expendable here. And like I said, you put all of that together, I think it's a B+ from the Rangers side. Now from the Anaheim side, I think it's a solid B. So we harp a lot of times on his negative season, but still, even under, pretty trying times, both mentally and physically, and of course, the fact that the Rangers as a whole were a mess last season, Chris Kreider was still third on the team with 22 goals. I get it. Power play production was down. He only had 30 points because he only had 8 assists on the season. I'm not saying it was a good year for Chris Kreider, but I think he goes to Anaheim. Obviously, he's playing under a 3-time Stanley Cup winning coach now in Joel Quenneville. I'm sure that those guys spoke before Kreider signed off on the trade because he wants to know what his role is going to be there. And I'm sure Quenneville is thrilled to get Kreider on his power play, to get Kreider on the penalty kill, to get Kreider in the locker room as a leader, and believing that Chris, who's been a physical beast, he's playing his best hockey after the age of 30, because he's kept himself in such great shape. So I get, the argument that he's 34, could be slowing down and all that. I don't think you'd find nobody that would be surprised in the NHL right now if Kreider scores 25, 28, maybe even 30 goals this season for Anaheim, depending on, what his ice time is, what his 5-on-5 play is and all that. You expect him to get back into double digits and, power play goals, and he does what he does, shorthanded. I don't think you get anybody to argue with you that, that the production will be there. But what he will also bring to a really young roster, a team that's on the cusp of being a playoff team. They've had their down stretch. I think, what is it, 7 straight years out of the playoffs. They've had their down stretch, but they're coming. There's a lot of great young talent there. And there are intangibles in this trade that we won't know until down the road. But Kreider could fit right in there. He's got some good friends on that team already. Jacob Trouba, Ryan Strome, Frank Vetrano, former teammates in New York, are there. He's also good buddies with Trevor Zegras. And you talk about things that could really make this a great trade for Anaheim. If Kreider, under Kreider's mentorship, if that's the right word, or maybe they're even, line mates, who knows? But if he maybe can help bring out the best in Trevor Zegras after a couple down years and injury-plagued years as well, Zegras can stay healthy and finds that level. Because he's a super talented kid. If Kreider's even just a small part of helping bring that out in Zegras, it's a massive win for the Anaheim Ducks. Again, on top of what he brings, his experience, his playoff experience, his quiet leadership. Much of his leadership is done behind closed doors. He's kind of, he's not the forward leader. He didn't like being the spokesperson and all that. He didn't like that in New York. But behind closed doors, Chris Kreider was the leader for this team, for the Rangers, and he will be for Anaheim as well. So listen, Anaheim, all right, they take on the $6.5 billion. There's still $32 million under the salary cap, right? And they can still be big players this offseason. I mean, just like the Rangers, this isn't their only move this offseason. This is not Anaheim's only move, too. It's their opening salvo. And I think it was a good one. You know, they could afford to take on the salary, which they did, $6.5 million a year. But it, you know, and it won't impede them for the rest of their plans. But they did not give up much. They swapped a third rounder for a fourth rounder, you know, in the upcoming draft. I don't think that's a big deal. Kerry, Terrence, you know, number 10 prospect. Okay. A lot of their top prospects have crested into the NHL or are on the cusp of cresting into the NHL. So, you know, where's Kerry Terrence's spot in this organization, or where would it have been? They can afford to give up Kerry Terrence. Okay. And that's no disrespect to him. So yeah, solid B for the Anaheim Ducks. Give it a little bit better, B plus, because the Rangers a little bit more desperate to get rid of Kreider's money, and also to continue to retool the core and the roster of the New York Rangers, which will continue upcoming this offseason. Chris Drury's going to be a busy guy. In fact, I'm working on a story right now detailing just that for foreverblueshirts.com. So make sure to get over there. We got a lot of Chris Kreider stuff up. We got, you know, obviously the trade story. We have Good Piece by John Kreiser, the 10 biggest moments in Kreider's Rangers career. That was a fun story. Eric Charles did a really, really good job for us at foreverblueshirts.com, breaking down the game of the prospect, Kerry Terrence, so we've got those up already. Got a story that posted this morning about, Kreider's classy exit from the organization. And like I said, working on another story or two here. So please keep checking us out at foreverblueshirts.com. Follow me on X at Jim Cerny. Make sure to message me. I love hearing from you. And follow the entire group at foreverblueshirts.com. So there are your trade grades for the Chris Kreider deal. Regroup this weekend. We will get back together early next week, and we'll start looking ahead. What's next for the New York Rangers? Thanks for tuning in.